Don't blame the defense for 5-7. Welcome to the Voice of College Football as we look at the Aggies spring of 23. And of course, we talked to Andrew Hattersley from Gig'em 247 Sports to give us the breakdown. Check out the videos on the offensive side of the ball, position by position. Andrew, what's going on?
Mark, how you doing? Yeah, it feels like spring ball's right around the corner now. It's roughly 3 weeks away. I know fans are really excited for it to get here and get rolling. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
52nd in total defense certainly doesn't measure up to what Texas A&M fans would expect from these great recruiting classes, and certainly the standard from 2020 in particular, but 25th in scoring defense. So that's certainly what counts, bottom line, and that's not a bad number at 21 points per game. Your thoughts as we start up front with the defensive front?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think A&M last year kind of very much had a bend but don't break mentality. They were pretty good most of the year at keeping teams. I certainly don't think they were, the primary culprit for obviously going 5-7. I think they can still take some steps forward. Big thing really this spring and this fall is improving the rush defense. They gave up over 200 yards per game last year, which is just way too high of a number, and that led to some of the time of possession the time of possession problems that they had. But overall, could have been worse in terms of number 25 and scoring defense, but I think they certainly want to get a lot better.
Certainly, guys like Shamar Turner and Walter Nolan were enormous recruits who have gotten off to decent starts in their collegiate careers, but haven't broken out yet. Take us through the defensive line.
Yeah, so they've got they've got a lot of key guys back there, and I think like some other areas, improved health is probably one area that they're trying to hit. We talked about that a lot on the offensive side of the ball. McKinley Jackson's a big name that's back. He battled a bit of an elbow injury at the beginning of last year, and you could just see once he got back into the lineup, and as he got healthier and healthier, he made a big difference in up front. Shamar Turner, I think everybody's kind of waiting for him to really break out. He was a really highly rated prospect coming out of high school. Has had some trouble staying healthy at times, but the potential is enormous there. And you mentioned Walter Nolan. I think he's certainly a guy that everybody's really expecting to kind of take that next step. And they've got some other guys too. Shamar Stewart, really impressed as a freshman, finished amongst the team leaders in pressures. LT Overton was a guy that was actually supposed to be in high school last year and reclassified into the 2022 class and came in and made a immediate impact. And so I think they've got a lot of guys there. I think it's just a matter of can they kind of, Fadil Diggs is another one that is returning and certainly flashed a lot last year. White, they've got a lot of bodies there. They've just got to play more consistently up front and kind of fix some of those run game issues.
On to the linebacking core, I see where Andre White moves on to Georgia Tech. Andre White, 35 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, was a top 10 tackler on the team. So besides that, how do we shape up at linebacker?
Yeah, I think this is an area, and I'm gonna be watching closely. I think a lot of people are gonna be watching closely in the spring and still kind of taking the question of, is this an area A&M still looks to add to in the transfer portal? I think it's certainly something they could look to do. They lost a couple linebackers in the transfer portal. They signed 3 last year in Damian Sanford, Torian York, and Chance Johnson. Now, are any of those 3 ready to step on the field and contribute right away? I'm not sure about that. I think all 3 of them are probably going to have some development in front of them. Edgerrin Cooper's a big deal to have him back. There was some questions this offseason and some, frankly, by him himself, like he put on Snapchat that he was, thinking of transferring, and that obviously sent everybody into a massive panic. He's a Baton Rouge, he's a Louisiana native, so you can imagine if he had gone across to to LSU in the transfer portal. That certainly would have been a huge problem. But he announced he's returning for another year in Aggieland, and I think that's just a massive deal for this linebacker room. They really need him to be that leader of the room. Chris Russell's also back. And those are gonna kind of be the two veteran pieces to this linebacker room this offseason. But um, Martrell Harris is another guy that saw some action last year, flashed at times, and has an important spring ahead of him to kind of take the next step. But I really do wonder if this is a room that they can still kind of maybe add to. Mason Cobb is a guy that they targeted early on in the transfer portal and really felt good about him, and he ends up at USC, and they just haven't been connected to a lot of other linebackers. But it's going to be a position group to watch how they perform in the fall or how they perform in the spring, and a question of whether they still need to add somebody into that room.
Got Andrew Hattersley on the line from Gig'em 247 Sports. Jump on over to Texas A&M site there on 247. Gig'em 247 to check out Texas A&M football prep for the spring, and of course basketball with March Madness coming fast. Cornerbacks, the two Jones boys are gone, Jalen and Miles. They bring in North Carolina cornerback in Tony Grimes, who had a lot of playing time there with the Heels. Your thoughts about that position?
Yeah, so this was a room they kind of hit pretty hard in the transfer portal. They were pretty aggressive. It was one of their first priorities. You mentioned Jalen Jones. He obviously declares for the NFL draft. Miles Jones um, heads off as well, and into the transfer portal. And they had quite a few departures in this room via the transfer portal. Was probably the one area that was hit the hardest. Denver Harris is obviously in Baton Rouge now with LSU. Marquise Groves Killebrew is with Louisville, and then Smoke Bowie ends up at Georgia. So they were really hit hard. The big name back is Tyreek Chappelle, and I think he could have a really big year. And Tony Grimes is expected to come right in there and provide a veteran presence and play right alongside Tyreek Chappelle. And then they brought in Sam McCall as well. Was rated as a safety coming out of high school, but A&M really sees him as a cornerback, and I think he was a really important get as well. Didn't get to see a lot of action as a freshman at Florida State, but a guy with multiple years of eligibility remaining. So whether he's a starter this year or down the line, I think he suddenly becomes a very important part of that room moving forward. And if Tyreek Chappelle, if this is his last year before he heads off to the NFL draft, and Tony Grimes could certainly head off after this year as well. If he has a big year, then suddenly you're kind of thrusting Sam McCall into a starting role. And so I think that was a really important addition. They still have some other guys back as well. Deuce Harmon is someone that saw a lot of playing time and could certainly factor into the mix as well. There has been on campus for a couple of years. Bobby Taylor is heading into his second year. Kind of a guy that could play either cornerback or safety. Missed a good portion of last year with an injury that he actually suffered in the spring. And so he's back and healthy. And then added a couple cornerbacks out of the high school class as well in Javon Thomas and Bravion Rogers that were both very highly touted. And they're Javon Thomas is on campus this spring as well. So certainly a guy, if he can kind of take those steps to as a 2-time state champion. And, I think they're certainly hoping he might be able to contribute early as well.
This is a better question for about 2 months from now, after spring practice, after the spring game. But you mentioned the two cornerbacks from the high school class of 23. As you look through the other two levels on the defense and its safety and across the board, I would think the name David Hicks may show up pretty soon. But just in regards to 2023 signees that may make an impact, get on the field for some meaningful snaps this fall.
No question. I think David Hicks is certainly a name. When you look at what he did at the Under Armour All-American game, he was a monster. He was a complete monster, and just didn't lose a whole lot of reps over the course of of the week. I think he's certainly one. I think Javon Thomas certainly can as well. I think at that cornerback room, they're going to need him to kind of come in and contribute early. And I think the same could be said for Bravion Rogers, is two guys that are just tremendous athletes. Um, and then looking at the rest of the commitment list from that cycle, and yeah, I think you could potentially have a guy like Damian Sanford, given the linebacker depth there, and he seems to be the one guy that I think would be further ahead if there was a guy that would have a chance to make an impact earlier than the others. I think he would certainly be the one. Those are some of the young guys I think that could make an impact in their first year, and I think the others are going to have time to develop. Rylan Kennedy's a guy that last year was actually his first year playing football in high school. Was a former basketball player that decided to try his hand at football, and colleges loved what they saw from him as a senior. So I still think he's got some development in front of him. I think Torian York and Chance Johnson have some time in the weight room as well that they have to develop. And another name we'll get to in a second, I'm sure, at the safety position is Dalton Brooks, another tremendous athlete from Shiner that can kind of do a little bit of everything. And but A&M's got quite a bit of depth at the safety position, so we'll see how much he kind of factors in as a freshman. But tremendous athlete.
Depth at the safety position, despite losing the top two tacklers, Antonio Johnson and Damani Richardson.
Yeah, so Damani was a big. He was another one that I think there was some questions of if he was going to head off to the NFL. He announced he's going to take advantage of his COVID year, so he's actually back for another year. Antonio Johnson is certainly the significant piece that A&M has to replace in the secondary, and I think they've got the guy to do that in Bryce Anderson. He played a little bit last year when Antonio Johnson was out, and just a guy that I think is kind of perfectly suited to come into that role and be able to do some similar things. To a little bit different player than Antonio Johnson was, and Antonio Johnson was kind of a thumper and a guy that could really get downhill and make an impact in the backfield. I think Bryce Anderson's kind of a guy that can be a factor in coverage and will certainly be a factor in the run game as well. But he's expected to kind of take over that nickel spot. And then you've got a couple other guys you saw playing time last year in Jordan Gilbert and Jacoby Matthews, who are both back as well. Both have, Jordan Gilbert's heading into now his third year on campus. Jacoby Matthews, his second, both Louisiana natives that I think they're looking for both to take another jump forward. And so I think they do feel pretty good about where that room is right now. Jared Kerr is another name I'd mention. I think he was a pleasant surprise last year. He missed his senior year with a back injury, and so it was kind of a question of if he's a guy that's going to need some time to develop. But he comes in and makes an impact, and I think they're really excited about him as well.
Andrew Hattersley, 247 Sports, Gig'em 247. Get on over there, check out his work and everybody else there on staff. Andrew,
Yep.
we appreciate you stopping by.
Always appreciate it. We'll be back on to for sure discuss how the spring's going and chat a little bit about the spring game as well.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Yep, looking forward to it. Thanks, Mark.